Now, I'd just like to introduce very briefly my great friends from the World Academy of Art and Science. And I start, naturally enough, with the honorary president of our academy, Ivo Slaus. He's a Croatian. He is a great physicist. He was a member of the parliament. And may I actually add something that is sort of like an inside business of the academy. Most organizations sometimes come into a bit of a blank corner or have a bit of a crisis. And actually, it also happened in our academy. Ivo, I'll ask him to say a few words about the academy, when it started, etc., and wonderful people that we have in it. But actually, we did have a bit of a crisis, and it was Ivo that had the courage to sort of squeeze the boil, as one says in English, come out with it, cleanse it, so to speak, and he did a fantastic job. So that's one of the many reasons why he deserves to be the honorary president of our academy. Ivo.
Thank you, Bogdan, for these nice words. It is indeed an honor for us from the World Academy, and there are several of us here present on this occasion. This occasion, in many ways, is unique. The very project that Bogdan has initiated, the young generation will change Ukraine and is changing Ukraine, is precisely what we mean by the paradigm shift. And let me jump into that describing the paradigm. The word paradigm actually was forgotten. It is the old word used by Plato a long time ago, but then reused in his history of the scientific, in the history of science, and saying, of course, that major events like quantum physics and the theory of relativity are the paradigm change. And then he said one thing, of course, those people who did classical physics very well, until they somehow pass away, until the new generation raised, brought up, and developing quantum physics comes, there will be nothing. So in much the same way, it is young generation that is going to produce this enormous paradigm change. And Bogdan, who I have a unique honor of, when I was elected to become a member of the Club of Rome, it was Bogdan who was there. When I became the Fellow of the World Academy, it was Bogdan who was there. He and I are essentially the same generation. And so from this time, and that is some 30 years ago or so, Bogdan and I were together. And as I had said, I had this unique pleasure of benefiting from his advice, his wisdom, and his leadership. And it's because of all of that that we in the World Academy feel that we want to honor Bogdan Dimitrovic with a special certificate of the Academy, saying the gratitude of all of us for all of what you have done. And here is Gary and me, on behalf of all 650 fellows, and on behalf of all of you. You know, there is an obligation. Bogdan always claims the obligation. This is for about the next 50 years. We do count on your continuous activities and ideas. And this is also a proof that somebody who may appear to some people to be old is far from being old.
Thank you. You know, since I'm a model of modesty, I will not read this certificate. But you should have read it.
No, I will read it, as a matter of course. I may have problems to take off my glasses. The officers, board, and fellows of the World Academy of Art and Science unanimously present a certificate of special appreciation to Bogdan Havrilishin for his outstanding service to the Academy. his many original contributions to leadership in thought that leads to action. This is our motto. Given in Kiev, Ukraine, this 25th day of April 2015, signed by our President, Heitor Gurgulino de Souza, by our Chief Executive Officer, Gary Jacobs, by the Chair of the Board of Trustees, Winston Nagin, and by myself.
Thank you very much, and the message is clear. This is a credit that they're extending for which I have to pay back with my work.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Please.
Okay, now let me turn to these introductory comments. The task I was given was to speak on global challenges confronting us today. So, if we look the first slide, you see that this is the time of unprecedented changes. Everything is changing. Take any one of them, you can't read them, but some show actually the presence of the motor vehicles, the other the telephone's number, then the use of water and so on. And if you want to see this in numbers, in the next one, you see that the world population grew from less than 1 billion to 7 billion and even more now, that the urban population increased from 3% to 49%, and of course the life expectancy, which was less than 30 years, just 200 years ago, has considerably increased. By the way, the life expectancy has been very low until that period, until 1800. Now, if we go on, we can then ask ourselves the question, how are we facing these enormous changes? Of course, there are two things, us and our environment. Okay, let's first talk to the environment. What we have done to our Earth. And here in red are at least 3 distinct areas which shows that we have been badly destroying the biological diversity. This is about the worst thing, and some people speak about coming the next great extinction. There were 5 great extinctions so far. Then there is a question also of enormous pollution, and then, of course, there's a question of the debate. Again, if you want to look this in terms of numbers, here it is, the ecological footprint, the measure of the human demand on our environment, has been estimated in '92 by Rees and his collaborator. At that time, it was just 1. Just barely we were satisfying. 20 years ago, we did it to a level of 90%. Now we are already at 50% more than that, at 60%. And if we continue with this, business as usual, then very soon we will come to 3, which means that we would need 3 Earths to satisfy that. There is a beautiful book by our fellow Andres Weichmann, who is also the co-president of the World Academy, who shows that. Now, this linear graph shows an interesting thing. Of course, shows, Bogdan said that he is modest. I'm a physicist. You know, physicists are about the most arrogant people that exist in the world. We express everything in numbers and then claim that we know the accuracy of these numbers. Sometimes, of course, turns out that we don't. But okay, this is the number that I believe is the correct number. This universe of ours has been created, formed, established 13,798 plus or minus 0.037 billion years ago. We know that number fairly well. At that time, there was physics only, nothing else. It took about 300,000 years when the atom was formed, and that is the beginning of chemistry. And then it took another almost 4 billion years on our Earth that life started, and that is the beginning of biology. Then, of course, is the fire. There, G should be replaced by M, is roughly 1 million years ago that our ancestors, at that time, of course, hunter-gatherers have discovered fire. And that is the beginning of our time. So for a million years, almost for a million years, because this is period much, much shorter, we were hunter-gatherers. And this is still deeply rooted in the way as we behave. We are petty, we are jealous, we are envious. Of course, we are creator. We are the only creator beside God that, of course, is creating something new. And, of course, in the music that we just heard is precisely that always creative component. cognitive revolution starts about roughly 70,000 years ago. And then 12,000 years ago is a famous Neolithic agricultural revolution, when we started to domesticate various animals. And, of course, instead of being hunter-gatherers, we settled. We had a constant place where to live. So our interaction with the nature, with our own environment, is maybe best described by what is appearing in the first encyclica of Pope Francis, which are the words told by a peasant, I believe in Argentina, to him, where he says, God forgives always, human sometimes, nature never. So these are the things that are true for this global challenge. Our contemporary world is fast changing, as we said, is global, is interdependent. Everything interdepends on everything else. So there is no way how you can solve the problem by assuming that everything else is insignificant. Now, these are to some extent okay. Then there is something which is very, very bad for us in so-called social, economic, and political sphere. And these are the uncertainties. And Nicholas Taleb actually coined the word black swans to describe them. Of course, those of you who are familiar with physics, chemistry, and biology know that uncertainty is, in our field of physics, not a bad word. As a matter of fact, it's a very good word, because we know that the basic equation is the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. But while we use the Heisenberg uncertainty principle to do a first-rate, accurate, modern science, these uncertainties of the black swans is something that we do not understand. And let me just flash some of the problems. Obviously, destruction of natural and human capital. Obviously, a very low employment rate. Obviously, an enormous inequality. We do believe that these are essential political tasks and that they are achievable. So this is what is necessary. Now, not to be just only gloom, bad stories. My great predecessor, Harlan Cleveland, pointed out that we have to look at our successes. And of course, our time can be best described by the famous opening sentence of Charles Dickens' Tales of the Two Cities. It was the best of time, it was the worst of time. So this is the best of time, this is the worst of time. Why? You can see some of the great successes. As we said, life expectancy increase, GDP, decolonization, more democracy, some very successful treaties, and so on. So this looks very, very good in many ways. A simple answer to a simple question, would you like to live 200 years ago? All of us would answer no, because it was much more miserable time than it is now, except in spite of the fact that occasionally it may look great. So when we look on the next slide, we see very clearly examples of our mistake. Here you have on one axis, on this vertical axis, you see one economic measurement, Human Development Index, okay? And you see on the other, on the horizontal axis, what is called the ecological footprint. This line, red line, shows what the Earth can tolerate. And basically, you see that countries, for instance, like Cuba, are just there, being at one of the ecological footprint. And you see the countries that usually are taken as a good example, for instance, Canada or Norway, not to mention United States, not to mention some of the Middle East countries, really are over-consuming. And that is unnecessary because they are not improving their Human Development Index in any way. Now, yes, please, the next one. Here is an example of the tragedies that we have caused recently, so that you see this in numbers. Here is a number for the World War II casualty of 60 million, and of course there is no doubt it started on September 1st, 1939, and it ended in September of the 45, with after, of course, the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Otherwise, of course, this number would be different. This number is 60 million casualties, 3 times bigger than the World War I, comparable, believe it or not, with an enormous damage done by the Spanish flu, considerably larger than the natural disasters throughout the century, And one thing which, of course, sounds here very familiar, the famous study of the democide. What is the democide? Democide is the number of people killed by their own government at that time. Specifically, it includes all Stalin purges. It includes the Holodomor. This number is 262 million. Now, the other number, which is equally shocking, is the recent study which shows that due to the worldwide poverty, people are dying. So this is part of the sin of omission, part of the things that we don't do, what we should be doing, and that number is even huge, is even bigger. Then, of course, we sort of want to live on the edge of a dangerous situation. These are the data from the European Leadership Network showing, with the red, really very serious potential accidents, with the yellow, something which are quite serious, and blue, so to say smaller. But the blue, for instance, would be an excellent example to represent in 1914 the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. When you look on the next slide, you will see the situation in the Baltic area where you see better these red flags and so on. This came up essentially from people in the West. Minister of Foreign Affairs Lavrov replied to something of the similar story, basically indicating, yes, we are in trouble. And what these troubles mean, if we look on the next slide, is when physicists made the nuclear bomb, then of course they were shocked by that. You can read Oppenheimer and so on. Oppenheimer, by the way, is one of the founders of the World Academy. And so in 1947, on the issue of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, they decided to put the doomsday clock, which indicates how far we are from the total catastrophe, from midnight. And they put it at 7 minutes. Then in 1953, where both the Soviets and the USA exploded hydrogen bomb, and you know the story, Teller, Oppenheimer, and so on, they put it to 3 to 2 minutes. Then after the end of the Cold War, it was to 17 minutes. Last year, it was to 5 minutes, and this year it came to 3 minutes. And it might actually be even worse. And these things are by no means simple. What we are talking is the question of intercontinental ballistic missiles that take quite a short time from one to another, and therefore require decision-making, which of course goes beyond any parliament or any of the other things. Now, problems that we have, of course, are deeply rooted in what is called the governance. And of course, the fair and the free elections are something that is the basis of that. And of course, in the lower part of the plot, you see that people equally consider that in their countries elections are free and fair. But when it comes to the question whether the country is run by the will of the people, then the number of those who claim that it is run by the will of the people is much, much smaller than the other one, which means that there is a failure in a democratic process, which of course sometimes we take as being a surprise, but let's read the Federalist Papers of the founding fathers of an American democracy, and you will read Madison saying a famous article entitled "The Tyranny of the Majority." So the fact that you won the majority is not enough. There are checks and balances that should be done. And of course, here is the horizontal view of how the work of the United Nations has been considered. You see originally that almost 60% were considering that UN is doing a good job, while 30% had doubt. Now, of course, the situation is totally opposite. What are the problems that we consider to be most important in European Union? As you see, the overwhelming majority of the people considers that the question of employment or low employment is absolutely the #1 problem. When we had a meeting with then President José Manuel Barroso, he absolutely admitted having less than 70% of the employment rate is unacceptable. But this is what we have. So European Union put 75% as a goal to achieve. At that time, Denmark had this higher percentage, nobody else. And of course, that means that we are wasting, throwing away 30% of the most valuable capital, and I will show you in a minute why we argue that this is the most valuable capital. The other problem we spoke of is an enormous inequality in distribution, and you see, of wealth. and you see how it looks like. The bottom 99% actually is getting less than 19%. Now, why do we worry? I mean, why should I be concerned if you are getting much more, if you have much more money than I am? As a matter of fact, if I'm a good person, I would be only happy and satisfied that you are doing that. But the reasons are the following, as you can see. This is, I'm not going through the work of Thomas Piketty, of Milanovic, or Salah Martin, and so on. I'm showing you just a very simple plot made by two British MDs, where they actually indicated that if you plot the GDP, on the other hand, with respect to the question of inequality, then the more inequality it is, the worse the situation is. So United States has higher infant mortality rate, it has lower life expectancy, and all of the other indicators are worse and worse. And let's skip this one so that we are in touch. This is the sheet which shows actually that the most important is the capital, the human capital. See, for Japan, for the United States, and for all of the countries, human capital is much more important than is the natural capital, and much, much more important than money and all of the other things that are. So, what we strongly believe, and this is what Gary will be saying in his part, is yes, we need a new paradigm. A new paradigm has to be focused on the human beings. And that is the essential message we want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ivo is like a volcano of knowledge. It virtually explodes. And I think a very good demonstration of what the Academy is all about, trying to understand things in depth, but also understand things, the interrelationship about things, understanding facts and what they mean, causes and effects, and therefore the needs. Thank you very much.